Sparks erupted from the reactor housing as another blast wave hammered the mining station's hull. And Cora's scarred fingers never wavered as she rerouted power through backup conduits that hadn't been designed to carry this kind of load. The evacuation klaxons had gone silent an hour ago. The transport ships had vanished into hyperspace 43 minutes past that, their drives painting brilliant streaks across the star field as they fled toward the inner colonies with their cargo of terrified miners and administrative staff. She'd watched them go from the observation deck while her hands worked automatically, checking systems, assessing damage, calculating possibilities that existed only in the brutal mathematics of survival. Now the station was hers alone. Another impact, this one closer. The lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, atmosphere hissed through a breach that the emergency seals hadn't quite caught. Cora wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of lubricant across her skin. The gesture was automatic, born from years of working in the deep shafts of Earth's most hostile mining operations, where a moment's inattention could mean death by cave-in, toxic gas, or the crushing pressure of 10 kilometers of rock. The attacking ships weren't visible yet, but their energy signatures burned hot and angry on her displays. Vorthak raiders, most likely. Pirates who'd grown bold enough to strike at human settlements, believing that a species barely a century into space travel couldn't possibly pose a threat to warriors who'd been raiding the trade routes since before Earth's first satellite achieved orbit. They were about to learn something about evolutionary pressure. Cora's workshop occupied the station's lower maintenance level, a maze of pipes and conduits that most people found claustrophobic. To her, it felt like home. The walls here were thick with the accumulated detritus of a working mining operation, spare parts, salvaged components, and the kind of redundant systems that kept people alive when the universe decided to test their worthiness to continue breathing. She moved through the space with predatory efficiency, her body adapting to the station's rotation as artificial gravity fluctuated under the assault. Her hands, mapped with old scars from 1,000 repairs under impossible conditions, began selecting components with the same careful precision her ancestors had used to knap flint into cutting tools. A proximity alert screamed from the main console. Cora glanced at the tactical display and felt something cold settle in her stomach. The Vorthak ships were moving faster than she'd expected, their formation tight and professional. These weren't desperate pirates looking for easy cargo. This was a systematic assault designed to strip the station clean before the Colonial Defense Force could respond. Time became her enemy now. She pulled a fusion containment coil from its housing, feeling the weight of it in her hands. The metal was still warm from residual energy, and she could sense the barely contained forces that had powered the station's industrial systems. In the right configuration, with the proper catalyst and sufficient pressure, those same forces could punch a hole through a battleship's armor. The question was whether she could build that configuration before the raiders breached the inner hull. Her fingers moved across her workbench, selecting tools that had been crafted for maintenance, not warfare. A plasma torch became a focusing element. Industrial cutting lasers transformed into targeting systems. The station's ore processing equipment, designed to crack asteroids into manageable chunks, provided the raw power she needed to turn theoretical physics into applied destruction. Another impact, this one strong enough to knock her against the workbench, and she felt the station's frame groan under stress that its builders had never intended it to withstand. Somewhere above her, the Vorthak were probably marveling at the primitive construction, the inefficient use of materials, the obvious vulnerabilities in a structure that had been designed for mining operations rather than military defense. They didn't understand that humans had learned to build things on a world that was constantly trying to kill them. Cora's hands found their rhythm now, the same focused calm that had carried her through reactor repairs in the crushing depths of Earth's mantle, where the temperature could melt steel, and the pressure would compress a human body into paste in the space between heartbeats. Her breathing slowed, her pulse steadied, and the chaos of the attack faded into background noise as she entered the meditative state that her instructors at the Deep Earth Academy had called the zone. The first component array came together like a three-dimensional puzzle solved at speed. She connected power feeds to distribution nodes, routing energy through pathways that would have horrified a safety inspector and delighted a weapons designer. The station's own fusion reactor became her ammunition, its contained stellar fire waiting to be shaped and directed by her increasingly elaborate modifications. A new sound reached her through the hull, the high-pitched whine of cutting beams. The Vorthak had given up on battering their way through the station's defenses and were now systematically carving access ports. Standard pirate protocol. They'd breach at multiple points, flood the interior with armed troops, and systematically strip anything of value before venting the atmosphere and leaving the corpse of the station to drift in the void. Cora smiled, and the expression would have terrified any Vorthak who saw it. Humans, it turned out, had very disturbing ideas about appropriate responses to mortal danger. She activated her improvised weapons targeting system, and displays throughout the workshop lit up with targeting data that the station's mining sensors were never designed to provide. But the modifications she'd made to the sensor array transformed equipment, meant for locating ore deposits into something that could track the heat signatures and energy emissions of attacking spacecraft with surgical precision. The Vorthak ships appeared on her displays like bright stars against the darkness, their positions updated in real time as they maneuvered for optimal breach positions. She could see their formation now, the careful spacing that would allow them to support each other while minimizing their exposure to defensive fire. Defensive fire that didn't exist as far as they knew. The cutting sounds grew louder, closer. They'd be through the outer hull soon, and then it would be a race between her engineering and their assault tactics. Cora's hands moved faster now, connecting the final power linkages that would transform her mining station into something altogether more dangerous. The fusion coil hummed with increasing energy, its containment field barely holding the forces she was asking it to channel. Warning lights began flashing across her improvised control panel, indicating power levels that were approaching the theoretical limits of the components she'd cobbled together from spare parts and salvaged equipment. She ignored the warnings. Earth had taught her that survival sometimes required pushing systems beyond their design parameters, and hoping that human engineering was robust enough to hold together long enough to matter. A new alarm joined the cacophony, breach detected, inner hull. They were inside now, armed and dangerous, and moving through the station's corridors with the confidence of predators who had never encountered anything more dangerous than themselves. Time to change that dynamic. Cora's finger hovered over the firing control, a simple switch that she'd improvised from the station's ore crusher activation system. Around her, the workshop hummed with barely contained energy as fusion fire waited to be unleashed through focusing systems that had been designed to cut through asteroids, but would serve admirably to cut through spacecraft. She thought, briefly, of the evacuation ships and their cargo of survivors who were probably watching from a safe distance, expecting to witness the final destruction of their workplace and the death of the stubborn engineer who'd refused to abandon her post. They were about to discover that humans didn't abandon anything without making their displeasure known. The targeting computer chimed softly, indicating optimal firing solutions on all 3 Vorthak vessels. Cora's scarred finger pressed down on the switch, and the mining station that had been built to extract wealth from dead rock became something far more dangerous. Contained stellar fire erupted from the station's modified processing equipment, coherent beams of fusion energy that crossed the distance to the Vorthak ships at the speed of light. The first vessel simply ceased to exist, its hull vaporized in the instant before its reactor could overload and add its own destruction to the expanding cloud of superheated plasma. The second ship had time to register the attack and begin evasive maneuvers before the focused beam punched through its engine compartment and severed the connections between its power plant and propulsion systems. It tumbled away into the darkness, its crew probably still trying to understand how a mining station had just demonstrated firepower comparable to a heavy battle cruiser. The third ship lasted longest, its pilot desperately attempting to bring weapons to bear on the station, even as Cora's improvised targeting system tracked its movements with mechanical precision. The beam that finally caught it seemed almost gentle by comparison, a surgical strike that disabled its engines and left it drifting helplessly in space. Silence. Cora's hands shook as the adrenaline finally caught up with her, and she realized that she just single-handedly defeated a military force that should have been capable of destroying anything humans could put in their path. The workshop around her was filled with the acrid smell of overloaded electronics and superheated metal, but the jury-rigged weapon systems were still functional. Still dangerous. Her communicator crackled to life, and she heard a voice she didn't recognize, heavily accented, speaking the trade pidgin that served as a common language between species. "This is Kethra of the merchant vessel Distant Prophet. We observed your engagement with the Vorthak raiders and request permission to approach. Our ship carries medical supplies and emergency provisions." Cora stared at the communication panel for a moment, trying to process the idea that someone had witnessed her improvised battle and wanted to offer assistance rather than flee the area as quickly as possible. She activated the response channel, her voice hoarse from the stress of the past several hours. "Distant Prophet, this is Mining Station Thornwick. Permission granted for approach, but be advised that our defensive systems are still active and may interpret sudden movements as hostile." There was a pause before the alien responded, and Cora could imagine the conversation taking place on the merchant ship's bridge, as its crew tried to decide whether approaching a human installation that had just demonstrated the ability to vaporize warships was a reasonable risk. "Understood, Thornwick. We are approaching on a direct vector, estimated arrival in 37 minutes. Our captain wishes to express admiration for your tactical innovation and extends an offer of trade relations with our consortium." Tactical innovation. Cora almost laughed at the description. What she'd accomplished was less tactical innovation than applied desperation, the kind of engineering solution that emerged when the only alternative was death, and humans had never been particularly good at accepting that alternative gracefully. She began the process of powering down her improvised weapons, carefully bleeding energy from systems that were already stressed beyond their design limits. The work was methodical, requiring the same focused attention that had characterized her modifications. But now, she could allow herself to think about what had just happened. The Vorthak raiders had encountered something outside their experience. A human who'd been shaped by evolutionary pressures that most galactic species couldn't even comprehend. Earth had taught her that survival sometimes required transforming the tools of creation into instruments of destruction. That the same hands that could nurture life could also unleash forces that would humble gods. But more than that, she demonstrated something that the galaxy was still learning about humanity. They weren't just another spacefaring species making their tentative way among the stars. They were the children of a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years, and every failure to destroy them had only made them stronger. The merchant ship appeared on her sensors exactly 37 minutes later, a sleek vessel that moved with the careful precision of traders who'd learned to navigate the dangerous spaces between civilized worlds. Cora watched its approach from the observation deck, noting the way its pilot adjusted course to avoid the debris field that had once been 3 Vorthak raiding ships. Her communicator chimed again. "Thornwick, this is Captain Keela of the Distant Prophet. With your permission, I would like to come aboard and discuss mutual arrangements that might benefit both our peoples." The voice was female, carrying the subtle harmonics that indicated non-human vocal cords, but speaking standard with an accent that suggested extensive contact with human colonies. Cora found herself curious about the alien trader who'd chosen to approach a human installation that had just demonstrated the ability to improvise weapons of mass destruction from mining equipment. "Permission granted, Captain. Docking Bay 7 is clear and pressurized. Be advised that our gravity systems are operating at Earth standard levels." Another pause, longer this time. "Understood, we will adjust accordingly." Earth standard gravity was significantly higher than galactic norm, a fact that most species found uncomfortable and some found dangerous. But if Captain Keela was willing to endure the increased gravitational stress, it suggested either exceptional physical conditioning or a compelling reason for direct contact. Cora made her way to the docking bay, her movements still carrying the fluid efficiency that had characterized her work during the crisis. The station felt different now, no longer just a mining facility, but something that had been tested by fire and proven itself capable of defending what mattered. The airlock cycled, and she got her first look at the alien captain who'd chosen to risk direct contact with a human who just turned a mining station into a warship. Captain Keela was tall and elegant, with the elongated limbs and graceful movements of a species that had evolved in lower gravity. Her skin held a subtle blue-green tint that shifted in the station's lighting, and her eyes were large and expressive in a face that managed to be both clearly alien and undeniably beautiful. But what caught Cora's attention were the captain's hands, graceful and strong, with the kind of scarring that spoke of practical experience with machinery and repair work under difficult conditions. Captain Keela extended one of those scarred hands in the human gesture of greeting that she'd obviously studied. "Engineer Cora, I presume. Your reputation has preceded you." Cora accepted the offered handshake, noting the way the alien captain adjusted for the differences in their physiology. "I wasn't aware I had a reputation." The alien's expression shifted in what might have been amusement. Word travels quickly along the trade routes. A human who can transform industrial equipment into weapons capable of defeating military vessels is someone that certain parties would very much like to meet. Something in the captain's tone suggested that those certain parties included more than just merchant traders looking for new business opportunities. Cora gestured toward the station's interior. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." The captain's eyes seemed to brighten at the suggestion, and Cora found herself wondering exactly what kind of mutual arrangements the distant prophet had in mind. As they walked through the station's corridors, Cora became aware of the way Captain Keela moved in the higher gravity, not struggling, but adjusting her gait and balance with the fluid adaptation of someone accustomed to working in hostile environments. It was the kind of unconscious competence that Cora recognized in herself, the automatic responses that came from spending years in places where a moment's inattention could prove fatal. They settled in the station's small conference room, a space that had been designed for shift meetings and safety briefings, but now served as neutral ground for what was shaping up to be a far more significant conversation. Captain Keela placed a small device on the table between them, and Cora recognized the distinctive hum of a privacy shield, military-grade equipment that would prevent any electronic surveillance of their discussion. "Now we can speak freely," Captain Keela said. Her manner had shifted, becoming more direct and focused. "The events of the past few hours have attracted attention from several interested parties. The Vorthak hegemony will want to know how a single human destroyed 3 of their raiding vessels. The Colonial Defense Force will want to understand your modifications so they can be replicated, and certain other organizations will want to ensure that such capabilities remain in friendly hands." Cora leaned back in her chair, studying the alien captain with new interest. "And which organization do you represent?" Captain Keela's expression became carefully neutral. "Let's say that there are those who believe the galaxy would benefit from a more equitable distribution of power. The hegemony has grown too comfortable with their dominance of the outer systems. Your demonstration today suggests that human engineering might provide interesting new options for those seeking to adjust the balance." The words carried implications that went far beyond simple trade arrangements. Cora found herself considering possibilities that she'd never imagined during the desperate hours of improvising weapons from mining equipment. "You're talking about rebellion." "I'm talking about progress," Captain Keela replied. "The current system serves the established powers while leaving species like mine to survive on the margins. Humans represent something new, a potential catalyst for change that could benefit everyone willing to embrace it." Cora studied the alien captain's face, noting the subtle signs of stress that indicated the seriousness of the conversation. This wasn't a casual proposition. It was an invitation to join something larger and more dangerous than anything she'd faced in the mining tunnels of Earth. "What exactly are you proposing?" Captain Keela activated another device, and the space above the table filled with a holographic display showing star charts and shipping routes that crisscross the galaxy like a vast web of commerce and communication. My consortium represents merchant interests from 14 different species, all of whom have reasons to desire a change in the current power structure. Your demonstration today proved that human engineering can create capabilities that exceed anything the hegemony expects to encounter. Working together, we could establish a network of hidden facilities capable of defending trade routes and supporting colonies that choose to operate outside hegemony control. The proposition was ambitious and dangerous in equal measure. It would mean leaving the relative safety of human space and venturing into the contested regions, where species struggled for survival against overwhelming odds. But it would also mean using her skills for something more significant than extracting ore from dead rock. Cora's scarred hands traced patterns on the table's surface as she considered the alien captain's proposal. The modifications she'd made to the mining station could indeed be replicated, improved, and adapted to different situations. Human engineering, shaped by the brutal realities of Earth's hostile environment, might provide exactly the kind of innovative solutions needed to challenge an established galactic order. You want me to teach others how to build weapons from mining equipment. I want you to teach others how to think like a human, Captain Keela replied. Your species approaches problems differently than anyone else in the galaxy. You see possibilities where others see only limitations. That perspective could change everything. The conversation continued for several hours, covering technical details and strategic implications that grew more complex with each exchange. By the time Captain Keela prepared to return to her ship, Cora had agreed to a provisional arrangement that would begin with technical consultations and could develop into something far more significant. As the alien captain prepared to leave, she paused at the airlock and turned back to face Cora. There's something else you should know. Our intelligence network has identified at least 3 other human installations that have been targeted for hegemony raids. Your success here today may have saved more lives than you realize. The information hit Cora like a physical blow. The attack on Thornwick hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern designed to eliminate human presence in the contested regions before it could become a threat to established interests. Which installations? She asked. Captain Keela's expression became grim. Mining platforms in the outer rim mostly. Places like this one, where humans are working alone and vulnerable. The hegemony appears to have decided that your species represents a potential problem that should be eliminated before it becomes unmanageable. The revelation added new urgency to their proposed partnership. If humans were already being targeted for systematic elimination, then cooperation with other threatened species wasn't just an opportunity, it was a necessity for survival. Cora extended her scarred hand to the alien captain. When do we start? Captain Keela's expression brightened with what was unmistakably relief. Immediately. I'll leave you technical specifications for communication equipment that will allow secure contact with our network. Your first assignment will be advising the defense preparations for a colony in the Kether system. They're expecting a raid within the next few weeks. As the distant prophet departed, Cora found herself looking at the mining station with new eyes. The modifications she'd made during the crisis were just the beginning, the first steps in a larger transformation that would turn humanity's industrial capabilities into something the galaxy had never encountered before. She returned to her workshop and began planning improvements to her improvised weapons systems. The jury-rigged modifications that had defeated the Vorthak raiders could be refined, standardized, and adapted to different situations. But more importantly, the principles behind those modifications could be taught to others who shared humanity's refusal to accept defeat gracefully. The galaxy had spent millennia operating under the assumption that technological development followed predictable patterns, that military superiority belonged to species with the longest histories of spacefaring warfare. Humans were about to demonstrate that evolutionary pressure could produce innovations that rendered conventional assumptions obsolete. Cora's hands moved across her workbench, selecting components for the next phase of modifications. The mining station would become something unprecedented, a facility that appeared to be devoted to extracting wealth from asteroids, but was actually developing weapons and defensive systems that could challenge the galaxy's most powerful military forces. In the depths of space, surrounded by the cold beauty of distant stars, she began the work that would transform her from a mining engineer into something far more dangerous, a teacher whose lessons would reshape the balance of power among the stars. The hegemony had made a crucial error in targeting humanity's scattered outposts. They'd assumed that a species barely a century into space travel couldn't possibly pose a threat to established galactic order. They were about to learn that humans had never been particularly impressed by established orders. And in the darkness between the stars, other mining stations and remote facilities began receiving technical specifications that would transform them from vulnerable targets into fortified positions capable of defending themselves against anything the galaxy could send against them. The age of human expansion was about to begin in earnest, and it would be built on foundations forged in the fires of necessity and tempered by the brutal wisdom of a species that had learned to thrive in the face of impossible odds. Cora smiled as she worked, her scarred hands shaping tools of creation into instruments of liberation. The universe was about to discover what happened when the children of a death world decided to make their mark among the stars. It was going to be educational,